We are really thrilled tonight, first of all, to have all of you. We had close to 200 people register for tonight's session, and I think that's in large part a tribute to our presenter tonight, who is the founder and creator of Invite Welcome Connect, Mary Foster Parmer, also the author of Invite Welcome Connect, the book. And she's going to give us a nice overview of the ministry, an introduction to it, and we'll at the end take your questions. And again, as we go along, please put your questions in chat. So I'm just going to get out of the way, and I might have something to say toward the end. But please, everyone, join me in welcoming Mary Foster Parmer.
Hello, everybody. I want to offer a prayer first. The Lord be with you. Thank you, dear Lord, for this night. Thank you for this time together. Dear Lord, I thank you for every single person who has registered and is with us this evening. I thank you for Steve and his tech help. And Lord, I ask you to give me the words that you want me to say this evening. And I ask for everyone here to have open hearts, listening ears, and be with us, Lord, as we do this webinar for this ministry. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
As Steve said, what I'm going to do tonight is give you, some of you have possibly been in some of my workshops through the years, or you've watched a video of me. And what I'm going to do this evening is give you sort of an overview of the origin story. Story's really important in this ministry, and give you a little background about how it all got started and a little history. And then we're going to move right into kind of looking at the checklist, really pretty much looking at the theology and the reason that I designed this ministry like I did. And so the first thing I'm going to do, though, is, and it would be interesting if you have the time to put in your chat the question that I'm getting ready to ask, because I ask this when I'm doing presentations. I always ask whoever's in the room with me, did you grow up, were you born into the Episcopal Church? Were you one of those cradle Episcopalians? And inevitably, the larger number of people, if it's 15 people in a room or 1,500 people in a room, most people come from a different tradition, faith tradition, or no tradition at all. And so then I tell my story of how I was born in Brookhaven, Mississippi. That's me and my grandmother's Adirondack chair in Brookhaven. And we moved to Natchez, Mississippi, which is a little town on the banks of the Mississippi River, when I was about a year and a half old. I tell people that I grew up in a Southern Baptist home, and it was a wonderful, hospitable home. And I kind of, I try to inject a little bit of humor because I'm always giving a lot of pretty serious information. And I tell people that we had a drug problem in our home. We were drugged to church. The 5 children of us, I was the middle child of 5 children. But my family gave me the great gift of hospitality. So we were always the ones that had the visiting missionaries and pastors with us. I went off to college, got married, lived all around the South. I landed in Beaumont, Texas in my early 40s, went through a divorce, and I had a 16-year-old son, 8-year-old daughter, and I opened a business recruiting physicians. I was sitting in my office one day in Beaumont, and I got a phone call from Sally Dooley, and she was on a couple of boards with me. She invited me to go to church with her. And so I went to church with Sally, which was St. Mark's Episcopal Church, this old, beautiful church in downtown Beaumont. I did not tell Sally that I had been going to that church through the back door. I had never worshiped there, but I had found the rooms of Al-Anon, which is for families or if you have a family member who is an alcoholic or an addict. So I found those rooms and began working through the 12 steps of Al-Anon. And as I did that, I had a real sense that God was calling me to ministry. But what do you do with that, when you are in your early 40s? And so I went to church with Sally. I was literally overwhelmed. I had never been to a liturgical church. And I had a real sense of the holy. I talk about that in the book. And through the next year, I spent a lot of time praying and journaling and hiking and reading. And when I did my 4th step and 5th step inventory in this 12-step group of Al-Anon, the person that I did it with said, "Oh, my dear, you need a therapist." So I found a therapist who gave me books to read that I never heard of. Henri Nouwen's Reaching Out, Hannah Hurnard's Hind's Feet on High Places, Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth. So my worldview had begun opening up. As I said, I had this sense that God was calling me to ministry, but I had not finished my college education. There I was, divorced, a woman in my early 40s, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of low self-esteem. About a year later, I was at a Young Life meeting, and our Young Life leader said, "Didn't you go to an Episcopal church a while back?" And I said, "I did. I went to St. Mark's." He said, "Mary, I go to a little small Episcopal church, St. Stephen's. We have a new rector." He told me what that was. He said, "I think you'll like him. He speaks your language. He's from Alabama." So I went to this little Episcopal church on the other side of Beaumont, St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. I walked up that long sidewalk, and trust me, I was nervous. And there was Patrick Gahan, and it was his first cure as a rector of a church. And I started worshiping there, and I met with Patrick, and he answered my questions, and I had a lot of questions, and I shared with him. I felt God was calling me to ministry. So what I started doing, what he started giving me to do? He said, "There's a little, what would you like to do around here?" I started going, and I was in his first confirmation class. Bishop Cox confirmed me. So my first job at St. Stephen's was weeding the garden, the inner garden that was there beside the church. And I would go once a week and I would weed that garden. And so eventually, not too long after that, I wound up closing my business that I had opened, and I went to work full time. During that first 5 years while I was there and under Patrick's leadership, the things that I learned from Patrick and the things that we did were the seeds of Invite, Welcome, Connect, because the church started growing, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And one of the most important things, remember that little small church, you've got to remember this is the mid-90s, 1996. There had been a big split. A lot of people had left the church. So one of the most important things I learned from Patrick, and if you don't hear me say anything else tonight, here I am, baby Episcopalian, young, eager to learn. What I learned from him was how critical it is to equip and empower laity for ministry. And that's what he did. He was really very intentional about asking people what they love to do and getting them involved in the church. After 5 years, Patrick left, and he went to St. James, Maryland to go to work there. And his son went to school there at St. James School, Episcopal School. And we had a revolving door of 5 clergy for the next 5 years. People didn't leave, though. The church really stayed together. So I was there 10 years. And then I felt that God was calling me to go back to school. So I moved from Beaumont. I went to St. Edward's. And when I went to St. Edward's University, I went full-time and got a degree in religious studies. When I graduated in 2009, one of the first phone calls I got was from Bishop Claude Payne. And he had founded a leadership group for young Episcopal clergy. It was actually, they had the administration part of it at the National Cathedral for a while. I think Eugene Sutton was there. In the next couple of years, Bishop Payne asked me to come to work for the Gathering Leaders, part-time director, low pay, no benefits. And I said yes to Bishop Payne. And I tell people, I wrote this in the book as well, the reason I primarily said yes immediately to Bishop Payne is because that woman, Sally Dooley, who had invited me to church all the way back there in 1995, she had been at a big gathering where Bishop Claude Payne was casting his vision for the Diocese of Texas to move from maintenance to mission. And he told everybody there at that big gathering in Houston to go home and just think of someone that you can invite to church. And I knew Sally through, as I said, a couple of boards. And so she pretty much is an introvert, and she was just doing what her bishop told her to do. Within the next year that I started working for Gathering of Leaders, this leadership group for young clergy, I got a phone call from Mary McGregor in Andy Doyle's office. And Andy Doyle had been elected bishop of the Diocese of Texas. And they talked about how St. Stephen's had grown really quickly. And they asked me if I would take what we did there in the newcomer ministry and then develop it out. And they gave me some churches to work with. We called it the Newcomer Ministry Project. And so I started working with those churches, and it began taking it all throughout the Diocese of Texas and really testing it. In 2013, I was invited to take this ministry outside of Texas for the very first time. Frank Allen was the rector at St. David's in Wayne, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. And Frank was on the board of Gathering of Leaders. And that's another thing. In the book, I talk about the synergy between the gathering of leaders and all these young clergy and seminary professors and bishops that were in the gathering of leaders were really instrumental as I began taking Invite, Welcome, Connect outside of Texas. So at 2013, Frank invited a couple of churches from the Diocese of Pennsylvania, Bethlehem, I mean. And then Hillary Raining is in this picture. Hillary is now, both Hillary and Matt Holcomb were young associate priests in 2013 when I was there at St. David's. Hillary is now just as accepted. She's the new rector at St. Columba's in Washington, D.C., and Matt is the rector at St. Michael's in Colorado Springs. So that was 2013. In early 2015, in April, we decided to have our very first Invite, Welcome, Connect summit at Camp Allen in the Diocese of Texas. And I talked to Bishop Doyle and I said, Bishop Doyle, we need a good preacher for this first Invite, Welcome, Connect summit. And he said, you know, Mary, Bishop Curry's a pretty good preacher. He's over there in North Carolina. So I called Bishop Curry's office and Bishop Curry agreed to be our preacher at that very first summit in April of 2015. And that's a picture of him at that summit. In 2016, we had our second National Invite, Welcome, Connect Summit. And then I asked Patrick Gahan. And Patrick at the time, I think Patrick had gone down to, he was now at Christ Church in San Antonio. And then in 2017, I was invited to take Invite, Welcome, Connect over to Europe, to the Episcopal Convocation in Europe. And when I did, Bishop Curry happened to be in Rome. And so Bishop Curry shot this little promo video for us.
Hello to all my friends, brothers, and sisters of the Convocation of Episcopal Churches in Europe. Your bishop, my dear friend, tells me that you're about to embark on Invite, Welcome, Connect, a program and effort developed by Mary Palmer of Texas to help us as Episcopalians to really engage the deep work of evangelism, which really comes down to inviting someone, to welcoming them, and helping them to grow as a part of the community of faith. I participated in this program as the Bishop of North Carolina, and we in our diocese were very much involved, and I believe are still growing in that involvement. It's a wonderful program, but it's more than just simply a program. It helps to inculcate a way of life that actually reflects the way of welcome of Jesus of Nazareth. The Jesus who said, come unto me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So Invite, Welcome, Connect is something we as Episcopalians can do. It's a way of evangelism that meets with who we are, that doesn't have us trying to be somebody we aren't, but actually calls us to be exactly who we are in Jesus Christ, and to invite and welcome and connect others to that life-giving reality. God bless you. God keep you, and let's keep this Jesus movement going.
There you go. So I forgot to tell you that when Bishop Curry was elected at the General Convention in Salt Lake City in 2015, he came looking for me. I was a lay deputy for the Diocese of Texas, and he wanted me to be the keynote at his convention that fall in 2015. And so that's what he meant by saying that they were involved with it. And the Diocese of North Carolina was really involved with Invite, Welcome, Connect. So in 2017, in the summer of 2017, I was invited to take Invite, Welcome, Connect up to Sewanee to the University of the South by Bishop Neil Alexander, who was the dean of the School of Theology at the time, and Bishop Dean Alexander wrote this, gave us this quote, which we used. I don't think of Invite, Welcome, Connect as a program. I think of it as a call, is a clarion call to the church to make sure others come to know who we know, Jesus, and what we have, abundant life. I absolutely loved being at Sewanee. I just really believed that that was going to be the final home for Invite, Welcome, Connect. It was really a wonderful time to be there. The year after that I moved the ministry to Sewanee, we Forward Movement published the book, and the summer of 2018 we offered the book. I think Forward Movement published I think they printed about 100 maybe copies for the General Convention for it to come out and be released. Bishop Curry wrote the foreword to the book, and that's us talking about it at convention that year. And here are a few people, you might recognize a few of these people from kind of around that came and were some of the first people who bought the book. And so I was really, really blessed to have Forward Movement publish the book. Rochelle Thompson was the editor of the book, and thank God for Rochelle for keeping me on task. The book wound up winning a book award. There were 30 contributors for the book, and I want to tell you that the award probably never would have been given had it not been for the 30 contributors. The gift is that the Forward Movement just this past fall did the 5th printing of the book, and in the 5th printing, they let me update the story of Invite, Welcome, Connect and the ministry. So in 2018, we were there at Sewanee at University of the South, and we had Rob Wright come and be our preacher in 2018 for that summit. And then in 2019, Rob Wright is the Bishop of Atlanta. And then 2019, I invited Carly Hughes, who is the brand new Bishop of the Diocese of Newark, to be our preacher. And so we were just really blessed with both of those. We invited different people from around the country to present at both of those summits. And then in January, the Episcopal Church Foundation, the Episcopal Church at large, and several other different entities in the Episcopal Church had something what they call Rooted in Jesus 2020. And Bishop Curry was the keynote. I think they had about 1,000 people come. And so Patricia Lyons, who is with Virginia Theological Seminary, and then Stephanie Spellers, who Bishop Curry named his canon for evangelism, and I did a workshop. We called it Putting Feet on the Jesus Movement, and it was how becoming beloved community, Invite, Welcome, Connect, and Way of Love intersected. That was in January of 2020. In March of 2020, we had our very first coach training, and we had people coming from about 5 or 6 different dioceses to be trained as coaches. And so that was in March of 2020. And then you all know what happened. We were scheduled to have our summit that summer there at Sewanee, and we had scheduled Bishop Kevin Brown, who's the Bishop of Delaware. Bishop Brown was one of those people sitting in the room at the convention for North Carolina back in 2015. And when he was elected Bishop of Delaware, he said to that diocese, we will implement and engage with Invite, Welcome, Connect, because it made such a difference in the church where he served in North Carolina. So I wound up going up there and presenting Invite, Welcome, Connect for that whole diocese. Then, of course, we know what happened. COVID happened. And so it really changed a lot of people's lives, as you all know. And it really had a real effect on the ministry of Invite, Welcome, Connect. We tried to get a Lilly grant. Lilly had given a grant to the School of Theology the year before, so we were turned down for that Lilly grant. And then through much, much prayer and discernment over the next couple of years, I began taking Invite, Welcome, Connect back out in about 2020, the end of 2021, back out to different entities around the country. But I also had a real sense that through much prayer and much discernment, that there's something called founder syndrome, where if a founder kind of stays on top of something that they've created, that it won't be sustainable. And that was really my sense about 3 years ago, that it was time for me to write another book, possibly a more personal book. And so I talked to my advisory board at the time and about the discernment. This is my working title for the book, Bearing Witness to the Holy, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. And then in 2024, last year, we filed to become an independent 501c3 charitable organization. And we did that. The advisory board turned into an actual board of directors. Frank Allen has been our president over this last year. We hired Steve last year as our very first executive director. And then in January of this year, we added Invite, Welcome, Connect on Demand. And those are 3, and Steve's going to tell you about that, when I finish up with this presentation. He's going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing with Invite, Welcome, Connect on Demand. It's really wonderful. We have 3 instructors right now. Chris Harris is a priest up in Michigan, Cranbrook, and Gardemo in Kansas. And then Mary McGregor is the layperson that was first invited me to begin kind of putting this material together. So in August of this year, Forward Movement sent out an email to everyone on their list saying that fall is coming and so are guests. Of course, they had, as you know, as I said, they had allowed me to, in the 5th printing, update the story and talk about having to leave in Sewanee and how hard that was for us. It was a great gift to be there for the 4 years that we were there. It was a huge gift to us. But then how we have become a separate entity. And Scott wrote this along with this email where they're really suggesting people get the book. Is we live in a world where people are yearning for a word of hope. Coming to a church can be scary for folks who have never been or who haven't been in a long time. We can ease the way for our guest by offering a gracious welcome. Now is a good time to get ready. So I'm so grateful to Forward Movement and that they continue to really suggest the book. This is the vision statement. It's been the vision statement for a long time for this ministry to change the culture. I talk about that in the book. I talk about how we're not trying to change the culture of individual congregations. Everybody's got their distinct culture, but it's about changing from that maintenance mindset to more of a mission mindset. My personal vision statement has been, always will be, probably is hope. And I talk about that. I talk about that in everything that I do, how the Episcopal Church became a place of hope for me as someone who came into the church as a wounded, divorced woman who really was looking for a place for God to use the gifts that I have. So hope. These are the core values, and really they are run through everything. If you do any core value work with your organization or your business that you're in, you know that the core values are the things that really drive what you do. And so these core values came to me as I was really developing the work. And the very first one is prayerful. Of course, it's prayerful. And we need to pray that God gives us the hearts to reflect God's gracious welcome. It's not our table to which we're welcoming people, it's God's table. Intentional is the next one. And so within the intentional core value, we need to nurture a commitment to effective ministry around evangelism, around hospitality, around belonging. And we have to really think and organize systematically. This ministry, Invite, Welcome, Connect, it's not a one-off, it's not a program. It's something that people can call it a framework. They can call it a process. It's helping you. It's very, very detailed. I actually have a slide a quote that came from Sam Portero, who's a retired priest up in Chicago, in a book called Brightest and Best. And he says, God is in the details. Inattention to the little things leads to the gradual loss of the larger ones. And this is so true. So this work is very, very detailed. And so when I've done clergy conferences or I talk to clergy in the room, I say, look, if you don't have that kind of brain, that systematic brain, detail oriented, then make sure you have people around you who do. Really important. The next one is relational. And, for a long time I called Connect closing the back door until I kind of got some pushback and said, it's not about really locking the back door. It's about leaving the door back open. But it's about how do we make sure that we're in relationship with people? How do we make sure that we are very intentional about being relational? So the relational core value runs all through the ministry. Accountable, we're accountable to God, to the gospel, and to each other. So these core values run through everything is Invite, Welcome, Connect. And then there's the challenge. In the book, we call this chapter instead of just challenges, we call it obstacles and opportunities. Because I ran into so many of them when I first began doing this. The very first one, I really speak about this, about complacency, because when I first started really taking this work out and doing this work with churches, I say complacency around newcomer ministry, around evangelism, around hospitality. It's our prevailing sin. We think of ourselves as a friendly community when in reality we're only a community of friends. And what I say is, watch where your people go during coffee hour, any kind of fellowship. They go over to their friends in the room. They don't go over to the person that they don't know. So are we a friendly community when in reality we're just a community of friends? Action or inaction, it's not what we teach, it's not what we preach, it's not what we say, it's what we do. Are we, at the end of the day, do we see Christ in the people who are walking in the doors of our church? Do they see Christ in us? Fears and assumptions are many, and I talk about these in the book. One of the churches I went to early on, I met with the vestry ahead of time, and this person said, I'd like our church the size that it is, and I get that. Churches, the St. Stephen's began to change as it began to grow and different people started coming in. This assumption, I just want to share this with you right quick. It's just because it's kind of fun.
Recently, retired bishop recently told us the story about the time he was preaching on evangelism at his cathedral. And after the service, an older lady came by and said, "Bishop, I don't understand all this of preaching on evangelism. If the Lord had wanted anyone to be an Episcopalian, they already would be one."
Yeah. And then, fears, assumptions. One of the things I talk about in this is that one of the rectors at a pretty large church in Austin said, Mary, rectors at churches our size don't want a program peddled to them. And it really kind of made me almost throw up my lunch, actually. And I had to call Bishop Payne and talk to him about it. And so it's just kind of an assumption that this is something that just you do one time and don't continue doing. Obstacles. I talk a good bit about sacred cows, and I'm sure that if there are any clergy on this call, that you know what those are when you first come to a church, and it's those things that have been done forever that people don't want to change. And the one I talk about in the book, it will remain, I won't say who it is, but it was a small church in Texas. And I went there, the rector had just gotten there, and he invited me to come and to kind of present this material for his vestry the next day. And this woman was taking me around to show me the church, before the vestry retreat the next day. The sacred cow story. So I asked the lady who was kind of showing us around, because she was a part-time employee at this little church, how do you get people to go from the worship service over to your fellowship hall, your parish hall, because there was a courtyard in between. And she said, it's very hard. And I said, well, you could have your coffee hour right out here under these big, beautiful oak trees. And she says, oh no, we have bees. So the next day, the rector asked me to share that story with the vestry, and I did. The gentleman was sitting there, and he said, Mary, I grew up here. I was baptized here. And he said, I've never seen a bee on this property. Well, that was sort of a sacred cow, and she was the kind of the gatekeeper for it. And so when I went to the Diocese of Oklahoma, a couple of years later, I was telling that story, and someone came up to me from one of the large churches in Tulsa, and she says, Mary, those sacred cows you were talking about, she said, we have a herd of them here, and what do you do with those things that kind of are that people think are so sacred that they don't want to change them? Well, what you have to do is just address them lovingly and gently. So invite is evangelism, welcome, ministry of hospitality, connect is the ministry of belonging. Invite is about not only just inviting people into a relationship with you and others in your congregation, but into a relationship with Jesus, of course. And this essential is really, really scary for Episcopalians. And when I get a little bit further down, I'm going to get into the checklist, and I'm going to talk to you about the tools that we help people with helping people learn how to share their faith story and learn how to invite people to church. Like I said, the deep truth of invite is courage versus fear. It takes courage. It took courage for that person to invite me to church. It takes courage to share your faith story. I use the scripture in 2 Timothy. It's been my favorite for a long, long time. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Welcome is the ministry of hospitality. In this one, I use the quote from Joan Chittister's The Rule of Benedict. She said, hospitality is one form of worship. Come right in and disturb our perfect lives. You are the Christ for us today. Welcome. As I began doing the research and reading for the Welcome Essential Ministry of Hospitality, I ran across a blog post from Daniel Simon. And Daniel at the time was priest up at Trinity Wall Street in New York, in Lower Manhattan. And he was trying to help his greeters and his ushers understand the importance of their ministry there at Trinity Wall Street. And I have this quote in the book from Daniel. This is what he says. He says, greeters and ushers are God's stand-ins and ambassadors, because you are standing at the threshold and you're the first person people speak to when they enter. You hold a huge amount of spiritual power. Because you are the first person they meet, people will project onto you all the assumptions and expectations that they've gotten about God before they walk in that door, positive or negative. How you respond will either challenge or reinforce those assumptions. Your actions of welcoming them may make all the difference, not only in their experience of your church, but even of divinity. So when I'm doing this work and I'm doing these presentations out and about and around the country, I at this point, I usually say that, we don't know when someone walks in the doors of our churches what's going on in their lives. For that matter, we often don't know what's going on in the lives of the people sitting in the pews beside us because we haven't taken the time to be in relationship with them. And I show a video, and it's a teaching video of a fast food restaurant and people coming in, and it puts up on the screen what's going on in their lives. And it's really, I've been using it for a long time, and it really kind of gets the point across. And then I share my own personal story of when my family was not welcome into a church. And it was when my grandson Ike was born 15 years ago. And some of you may have heard this story. I did not put it in the book. It's just too personal. And both my daughter-in-law and my son worked for DuPont. My daughter-in-law was a chemical engineer with Drexel, and she went to school at Drexel, and then she was with DuPont. So when little Ike was born, he couldn't suck or swallow, and they got him over to the NICU at the DuPont Hospital for Children, where they determined he had a very rare neurological disorder called Mobius syndrome that affects the 5th and 6th cranial nerves. So he couldn't suck or swallow. He had a small left hand and arm. They put him in the NICU and put a feeding tube in him and sent my family home. And my son called and asked me to find a church for them in this little township. So on that October morning, we go to church. I found this one little church. It was a little Presbyterian church. And we go to church, and I took this picture outside the door. And we go in and we worship and we leave, and not one single person asked us our name. So we left, and I was horrified. A couple of weeks later, little Ike fell asleep, and he stopped breathing, and he was put on a ventilator, and with round-the-clock medical care for the next year and a half. That's little Ike on the right last year. He is doing well cognitively. He's a great reader. Lee passed away last year, and that's tragic. But I tell this story, and I had permission to tell this story about my family, because I know what it's like to go to a church and then not be welcomed and not be seen. And what I say is that my family needed community. They needed a faith community. And when people come into the doors of our churches, the Holy Spirit brings them. So it's our job to find out why they're there. The deep truth of welcome is seeing the other. Connecting is belonging. It's about giving meaning to membership, discovering the gifts of the people. This is a really, I have to throw up these questions. They may be asking these questions. Where do I fit in? Can I make friends in this church? Is there room for me relationally? Does this church need me? Can I find a place to belong and serve? Am I safe here? Last year, the Department of Health and Human Services came out with a report that we have an epidemic of loneliness in America. It's one of our most widespread health issues. What's interesting about this report, and I have the link to it if anybody wants it, at the very end of this report, the Surgeon General gave suggestions for this epidemic of loneliness. And what do you think was one of the very first things at the top of the list? It was to find a community, a faith community, for this epidemic of loneliness that we have. So the deep truth of Connect is a sacred act of listening, and we really need to listen to people. I tell people that the Connect Essential, it's not just about the newcomers who are walking in the doors of our churches. It's for all those people sitting in our pews of our churches that may have their name, may be a member of our church because they want their daughter to be married there, or they want to be buried there, but they've never really gotten involved in ministry. And I call them pew potatoes. And then some smart aleck said, yeah, their children are called tater tots, right? But here's the thing, and this is important for you to hear. It may be our fault as leaders because we haven't taken the time to really listen to their story and to find out, where did they grow up? Did they grow up in a faith tradition? How did they make their way to the Episcopal Church? Why did they show up here today? I'm going to pull out of this right now and go to checklist, ideas, and resources. This is the checklist, and this is on our website, and this is the checklist that you will get. You can download this, and then for any workshop that we do, we go through the checklist. And I want to show this to you right quick because it's just rich. I mean, the website itself is full of information, lots and lots and lots and lots of information, detailed information about this ministry. This is a high-level congregational assessment questions. If you scroll on down, you've got a divided invite up into inviting tools, and then community, and then communication. And so with the tools, I have different suggestions, education and training. I talk about how the church, if I'm scrolling on down to inviting tools, then education and training. And then if you look at creative ways to invite your local community, I've got all sorts of things that we talk about, because sometimes it's easier to invite someone to something like this than it is to a worship service at first, all the way from blessing of animals to different things that you have at your church going on. And then community, I talk about, there's a whole thing about community. Your neighbors, do you know them? Do they know you? Local community groups, involvement, and then communication. So on the demand video that Chris Harris does, he really digs into communication and how to use social media and how to use your website and get everything up to date. Then the welcome checklist, the same way. It's very detailed. It's like a lot of questions, and it's just have somebody kind of look through your church and look at all the things that you're doing. And then at the end of the checklist with welcome, there are all sorts of ideas for how to really engage with the welcome ministry. Same thing with Connect. Under Connect, I have the process for connecting newcomers, the importance of listening, clear pathways to belonging, and discernment of gifts. I mean, there's a whole thing in the book about spiritual gifts and how important it is for us to help people discern their giftedness. And then the same thing with connecting. I give this initial conversation under Connect because this is what we did. We would invite the people that had given us their information when they came to visit us, and we would sit around. We would have something called a newcomer cafe about every 6 weeks. We would have lemonade and coffee and cookies, and we would just ask these questions. So we'd go around the room. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in another church tradition? If so, which one? If you're Episcopalian now, when were you confirmed or received? If you've been away from church, or how did you find your way to this church? So I'm going to finish up with just a couple of things in the book. And I really, I recommend the book. I recommend it highly. I'm telling you how important the book is. Rochelle Thompson, like I said, with Forward Movement, was really smart. She designed it so that that you can write in the side and under. But my favorite chapter in the book is the one on creativity. And I just want to give you just a little bit more information about that. John Omer, who had me up to Falls Church, Virginia, a couple of times when he was the rector there, suggested that I read this book, Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And in the book, it says creativity is crucial to business success, but too often, even the most innovative organization quickly becomes a giant hairball, a tangled, impenetrable mass of rules, traditions, and systems. And I added sacred cows, all based on what worked in the past, that exercises an inexorable pull into mediocrity. So creativity is crucial to this ministry. So whenever at the end of each of the demand videos, and when I do a presentation, we have a creative idea generating time. And we go around and we have people to kind of, with Post-it notes and small groups, and just throw out the ideas of things that we can do. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I was at St. Peter's in Ladue outside of St. Louis. And I think one of these that connect thing is some of the connect ideas. So the creativity is just really, really important, that we never lose a holy curiosity. I am going to turn it over to Steve because we don't have but about maybe 10 minutes left. But I just want to say before Steve comes on that I think you can probably tell how passionate I am about this ministry. I am going to go back to, if you want to get in touch with me personally to do any sort of workshop or you have a question for me, this is my email address and that is my phone number. You can text me and I will be back in touch with you, because even though I am trying to hand this ministry off, my agreement is that I will continue to do presentations and workshops. And so, Steve, I am going to turn this over to you for the remainder of the time.
Thank you, Mary. Would you all join me if you would turn on your cameras and just kind of give an appreciative wave to Mary, to thank her for this presentation. Mary has poured her heart into this ministry for so long, and I have seen her do many, many presentations, and I always keep coming back for more. So thank you, Mary, for being here, for doing this tonight. Your ministry has been a great gift to so many churches, and we're glad that we've been able to move into this new era with it as well, while you're still doing your workshops all around the country. Just wanted to let you know about upcoming events for Invite, Welcome, Connect. We have been doing a small congregation series of webinars. The third one will be on January 21. This will look specifically at the invite part of Invite, Welcome, Connect. But there's also a special assessment tool that we've put together to help you kind of look at how you're doing Invite and how to improve it. This series, the small congregation webinar series, has been really valuable because there is so much to Invite, Welcome, Connect. So many different things that you can do. That for smaller congregations, sometimes they don't know where to start. They can't do it all. So what can they do? Small congregation series really focuses on little things that you can do to start improving right away and seeing good improvement right away. So I recommend that to everyone. There's the link here. I'll try to put it in the chat as well to register, but it's also on our website on our events page. I also wanted to say a word about if I can get here, our Invite, Welcome, Connect on Demand. As Mary's talked about, we have a number of video lessons on the site. First of all, on our website, there are tons and tons of resources that are available completely free that you can come in and look, including the checklist that Mary was showing, and that's on our website. A study guide for Mary's book that's available free, but lots of other materials, a toolkit. But we do have also these lessons that are basically attempting to recreate the workshop in an online format. And for these, because they're expensive to produce, we do have to charge for access. But because we also want very much as many churches to have access to this as possible, we've kept the price as low as we possibly can. It's available for subscription, both at the diocesan level and at the church level. And at the church level, it's priced as low as $200. If you have 100 or fewer average Sunday attendance, it's $200 for the entire year for absolutely unlimited access for as many of your team members as you like. Everybody in your church can go and watch as many of the lessons as many times as they want. And they're downloadable resources and things like that. So it's really quite cost effective. At the diocesan level, the diocese can subscribe for as little as $1,500, depending on how many churches there are in the diocese. And again, for that, every single church, every single person in the diocese gets unlimited access to the entire set. And just a quick little screenshot of a particular lesson. It's videos and it's downloadable resources, and every video also has the transcript so you can read along and take that, because people learn in different ways. So very highly recommended that's something to come and check out. I think we're a little bit over time. I would like to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to thank Mary again, but I want to thank everyone. I invite you to come to our website, look at our events page, look for the resources that are on our site, because there's so much there, whether you're a subscriber or not. There's so much there that can help your congregation. And I thank you for spending your Wednesday evening with us.
Yes, and I want to thank you all too. Thank you so much for listening to me and for being here tonight. And I just will be praying for every single person that has been part of this tonight. And so thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Good night. Good night. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Bye bye.